Hey everyone, Mr. Harvey here. Let's continue our lecture on Chapter 9. We are talking about the Enlightenment, ladies and gentlemen, and we are talking about some of the really important philosophers and thinkers of this time. Now, in the previous video, I focused on Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Today, I'm going to focus on some of the other thinkers that we really need to understand and know during the Enlightenment. Perhaps one of the most influential, one of the most famous, I believe, really the symbol of the Enlightenment is Voltaire, ladies and gentlemen. Voltaire's real name was Francois Marie Arouet. And Voltaire, ladies and gentlemen, was incredibly influential within the Enlightenment. Um, Voltaire is going to really have some brand new ideas, really put them out there in the Enlightenment. And he is going to be very influential towards the American Revolution, but more importantly, the French Revolution that we're going to be seeing. He wrote numerous texts, the essay on the customs and spirit of nations, Candide, the philosophical dictionary. Voltaire, ladies and gentlemen, is super important for us. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of his ideas and talk about some of the things that Voltaire did. Like I said, really influential, probably and arguably the most influential of all the Enlightenment philosophers. And he was known, ladies and gentlemen, for his sense of sarcasm. He wrote tons of essays, of books, of articles, and where he was really sarcastic. He was very famous for his wit, and he often ridiculed those with whom he disagreed, and he often, and I'm talking about, he often disagreed and ridiculed some people who were very powerful and who were very well connected within France, but throughout Europe. He got himself actually kicked out of a couple countries. He got himself in trouble with various monarchs and various nobles and aristocrats. And Voltaire was definitely someone who was not afraid to speak his mind. Um, he's gonna be a definitely present a challenge to traditional Catholic theology and criticize organized religious institutions. Voltaire himself will be a strong deist, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And Voltaire really believed in the idea of reason. Remember, when I was kind of introduced the Enlightenment, ladies and gentlemen, reason, the idea of reason, that word of reason, that concept of reason is really, the symbol of the Enlightenment. He believed in reason, and he believed that reason was the key to progressing, uh, uh, to progress in society, and that reason was how society continues to advance. And he did not believe that religious faith was a way for society to advance. He was a true believer in that idea of reason, ladies and gentlemen. Um, and Voltaire really throughout his life is going to travel all around Europe, talking about his ideas, influencing numerous monarchs, and offend a lot of people. He's going to offend numerous monarchs as well. So he's going to, definitely have people who support him and read him, and he's going to be very celebrated. But he's also going to have his enemies, and he's going to offend monarchs, nobles, clergy members. He's going to offend numerous people with his ideas and how he says it. Okay. One of his most famous episodes is where he's going to be forced to go into exile in England after being imprisoned in France, and he offended the French monarchy, and he's going to stay in Frederick the Great's courts and influence him. He's gonna be very influential to Catherine the Great. When I went to St. Petersburg, there were numerous statues of Voltaire. Next to Catherine the Great. He's going to be very influential in Russia. But Voltaire went around and he spread his ideas and he stepped on some toes. Um, One of his influential ideals, ladies and gentlemen, was his call for religious toleration, and he argued against religious bigotry, religious injustice, and he really called for a more tolerant society when it came to religion. Now he was a Christian, and we'll talk about his deist and what deism is in a later lecture. But he came to distrust organized religion as corrupt, and this is kind of in the same mode as Martin Luther, as Erasmus. Is Voltaire is definitely going to call out the corruption of various religious institutions, and I'm not just talking the Catholic Church, but others as well. And so he this idea of organized religion of established churches. He viewed those as and not in a very positive light, ladies and gentlemen. And he was also a very big advocate for free speech. His famous quote regarding free speech is this. I have it listed right here. He says, "Where I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." This is going to be really important, ladies and gentlemen, and perhaps what Voltaire is best known for in Europe is this idea of being able to speak your mind. Obviously, it's going to be very influential in the American Revolution. Our Bill of Rights, one of the first amendments in the United States Constitution, is this idea of free speech. And Voltaire, and free speech is not very accessible and widely accepted with governments during this time. I mean, you could be in prison for offending someone like Voltaire. And so Voltaire was a big advocate for this idea of being able to speak your mind, being able to, and he definitely followed that. I mean, he spoke his mind often. It got him into trouble. He got, exiled, put in prison from some countries, but he argued that people should be able to do that, especially being critical of governments. And that's something that we're going to be seeing implemented in the American revolutions and some future revolutions, especially the French Revolution. He believed in equality before the law, but did not necessarily believe in this idea of equality of all social classes. We'll get to that. We've already introduced ourselves to the three estates. He didn't necessarily believe that there should be equality with all the different social classes or estates in France, but he believed in equality before the law. And Voltaire, ladies and gentlemen, this is very important for us. He believed in enlightened absolutism. Now, he believed in, he did not argue for a separation of powers or, a democracy or anything like that. He actually had similar views to Thomas Hobbes, and he believed that people were not very good and were incapable of governing themselves. And so he believed that there should be an absolute monarch, but he believed that these absolute monarchs should enact enlightened reforms. They should, freedom of speech, right, natural right. He believed that they should be enlightened. Okay, he should believe that they should enact some enlightened reforms, but there should be a monarchy. Okay, so some important ideas from Voltaire, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue. So his writings are going to be super influential, ladies and gentlemen. His criticisms are going to inspire people, abroad, but throughout Europe, but especially in France. And we are getting ready for, ladies and gentlemen, in the next couple chapters to talk about the insanity of the French Revolution. And Voltaire will be a key symbol within that revolution. He dies before the revolution goes down in 1789 and throughout the 1790s. But Voltaire was definitely, symbolizing that revolution. We will see Voltaire within that revolution, not literally, but his ideas put into action. Okay, and Voltaire is going to be very influential for that going down, ladies and gentlemen. So Voltaire is going to be very key for that. Let's talk about some of the, and I'm not going to go through all these quotes, but Voltaire is renowned for some of his famous quotations and, for some of his ways of expressing his ideas. And I'll just kind of go through a couple. I'll put all of them up here and kind of just go through a couple of them. But, one, he wrote that every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Love truth and pardon error. Voltaire definitely, had a very, a lot of wisdom and a lot of interesting things to say about a lot of different topics. He commented on a lot of different things, and so these are just a couple famous quotes that he is known for. Judge of a man by his questions rather than his answers. The way to become boring is to say everything. The importance of listening. Like I said before, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. So Voltaire, ladies and gentlemen, had a lot of inspirational ideas, a lot of inspirational quotes, and we're going to see Voltaire in the future, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Next up is Baron de Montesquieu. Okay, Baron de Montesquieu. He was a noble of the robe. And if you all remember, kind of going back, this is a new noble kind of created through the early Bourbon line, Henry of Navarre. Right, also related to that intendant system. But he's a noble of the robe. He's French. He was a lawyer and a member of one of the French parlements, which is those judicial entities. And he lived very comfortably, and he's a noble, right? He has a lot of privilege. We know some of the privileges that he has. He doesn't have to pay taxes, doesn't have to do the corvée. A lot of privilege, but he saw there was a need to reform. And Montesquieu is known for kind of seeing those clouds gathering for the French Revolution. He saw that there's some big problems, and he also looked at what was going on in England and was really inspired. Okay, he really held up Britain's constitutional monarchy as the wisest model for regulating the power of the government. And what he is going to be known for is his spirit of the laws. And this is considered one of the most enduring and influential political books ever written, because he's really going to talk about the state of politics and some of the changes that are needed in politics. And what he's going to be talking about is this idea of checks and balances that he is being influenced with by looking at Great Britain's model of government, by looking at their English Bill of Rights, by looking at their constitutional monarchy. And Montesquieu is noting that changes are needed, and that France needs to change, okay, or they're going to have a problem. And guess what? They're going to have that problem in the French Revolution. So he one of the things that Montesquieu says I find really interesting is he reasoned and he argued that there's no set of political laws that can apply to all people at all times at all places. And what he's saying, ladies and gentlemen, is there's no like natural laws of politics. He says there's no, it's not like, gravity where it's, it's the same on Earth, for example, the same everywhere. He's saying that politics are complicated and there's a ton of variables in different countries. And so you don't have this single set of political laws that can apply to France, that can apply necessarily to Germany or Italy or everything. You have a country's size, its population, its culture, its traditions. Those all play a role in shaping the political ideology of a country. And so he's saying is that every country's politics, is different. And there is no single set of laws that kind of applies to everybody at the same time, like science. And so that's just I found that to be a really unique idea that he was kind of putting out. Now, Montesquieu did not like the absolutism of Louis XIV. He didn't really agree with absolutism, and that's one of the influences we see Great Britain in their parliamentary model, having on him. And he favored a government limited by other institutions, and he wanted the French Parliament, the court of nobles, the judiciary, to check the power of the monarchy. And the idea that he is kind of putting forth, ladies and gentlemen, is this idea of separation of powers, a system of checks and balances. And that's what he's known for, this idea of separation of power. And the goal is to prevent tyranny and promote liberty within government. And it's this idea that, you have, and obviously this is how the American Republic is founded. Numerous, republics throughout the world are founded on. It's this idea of separating a government into separate branches that can check and balance each other. And so you don't have all the power around one entity or institute, such as a monarchy. For example, looking at Great Britain, what they have during this time is they have a monarch, which is kind of like the executive power, a parliament, which is the legislative power, and the courts, which is the judicial power. And you'll look at, for example, the American Republic, where you have Congress separated into a House of Representatives and Senate, which is the legislative branch, an executive branch, which is the presidency, and then you have obviously the courts, which is like the Supreme Court of the United States. And so you have a system of checks and balances where one entity of government can check the other one and balance that out. If a president can't necessarily pass a law without the Congress, and Congress needs the president, and so everything kind of balances itself out, and that's very important. He's seeing that in Great Britain, and he's saying France needs to introduce this and try to use this model. Okay. And his ideas are going to, be very influenced in the creation of the American Constitution, which I kind of just referenced, and the French Revolution. All right, but we're going to see when it comes to the American revolutions, and we'll get there, the American Revolution and the French Revolution, they're going to be entirely different revolutions with very different outcomes. One is going to be a little bit more stable than the others, i.e. the American Revolution will be a little bit more stable than the French Revolution. The French Revolution is going to get out of control. And we'll get to that in chapters 10 and 11. All right, and there is Montesquieu, a noble of the robe, separation of powers, his spirit of the laws. Now, another thinker that I really want to talk to, and one of the more controversial thinkers of his time, was Rousseau. Rousseau, two important texts on here are Emile and the social contract. We're going to talk about Rousseau's ideologies when concerning women and society, and then this idea of the social contract. And this is a very enduring social and political text with some very interesting and influential ideals. Let's talk about him. So he was a very isolated individual. He had numerous children that he abandoned. He was very pessimistic. He did not like the world. He did not like society. He did not like people very much. He had very few close friendships and relationships. A little Machiavellian in his ideologies when it came to society and people. Okay, and part of Rousseau's philosophy centered around this idea that civilization and the advancements of society had corrupted humans. And he had this idea called the noble savage, in that he argued that human beings in their primitive state had been good. But as social institutions had developed, as humans had, developed and civilization had developed, that humans kind of had lost this goodness and become corrupted. And so he's really talking about, like, how do we remake society into a more moral society? And that's going to be a really big part of his thinking. He believed evidence of this of the corruption of society and the corruption of human institutions was the unequal distribution of wealth. And he said this is a manifestation of this evil and this idea that social institutions are corrupt and humans have lost their goodness, and that there is such severe inequity in the world. And so, one of his quotes of where he kind of puts forth this idea is he states that man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. And what he's saying is man is born free and man is born, good, but as they go through the process, of society, they become corrupted, and eventually they are enslaved and almost by themselves. That the society enslaves humans with their ideals and kind of the social context in which people grow up in, and society is a corrupting factor. And he was really thinking about, how do we change that? How do we change society? Obviously, humans create society. How do we change society on a grand scale? And that's going to be part of his ideas. And so he put forth this idea of the social contract. And what Rousseau is going to suggest, and we'll kind of get into the political implications of this as well as the social implications, is that Rousseau suggested that society is more important than individual members, and that human beings independent, living alone and not working together, can achieve very little. But by joining together, humans can achieve significant action. That's where significant change can take place, is when humans come together and they start to work together, and that's where change can take place. Okay. And a large question that he's trying to kind of get at in this thinking is, how can humanity, how can humans change, their moral path? How can humans create a more moral society? Which I find very ironic, ladies and gentlemen, that Rousseau is saying this from someone who has abandoned numerous kids, his children. It's a little ironic when I think about that, but that's what he's trying to, come up with. What kind of community allows people to behave morally? How can Europe achieve a more moral community? And so he's trying to think about that and grapple with that ideology and that idea. Okay, and so what he's going to say is that Rousseau believed in this idea of the general will, and that humans need to band together in large groups and create a more moral society, create a more moral government, and create laws together through the will of the majority, aka the general will. And that humans, a community needs to form a social contract with each other and therefore create their own society, government, and law through the will of the majority. So people, for example, get together and they, say, for example, for our class, they're like, Harvey, we want no more homework for the year. Well, if we have 30 students in class and 16 vote for that and 14 say no, well, the majority gets out and there's no more homework. That's kind of the idea, that the will of the majority. And so it's the community getting together, for example, our class getting, they're talking about an issue and voting on that, and then kind of adopting that rule. So for example, so no longer is homework allowed in my class. Now, unfortunately, we can't follow that because we got to prepare for our AP exam. But I hope you all kind of understand the example I'm trying to give you, the will of the majority. Now, Rousseau defined freedom as obedience to the law, aka that he defined freedom within this as people having the ability to have input in the creation of these laws and help coming up with these laws. And so if the majority passes these laws because people have had the input, been able to participate in the constructing these laws, that's freedom. And so he said, because people have been able to help, tailor and create these laws. And what he's, politically strongly implying is a direct democracy where people are directly being able to participate, not through representatives, but through their direct, political action. But the idea is that the general will would always be right, because if people, for example, the majority says no, we want homework in my class, then that will be the law, right? It's the idea that the general will is always right because it will follow what the majority wants, and to obey that general will was to be free because society had input in creating that law. But there is a fundamental flaw. There's a downside to this, in that minority viewpoints, are not going to be recognized. So, for example, my class, if everyone votes to not, have homework anymore, for the 14 people who voted, we want homework, they unfortunately will not get their way, and their viewpoints will not be recognized. However, in the spirit of the community, the majority did get their way and did speak and were the majority wanted to follow that. So 16 out of the 30 students did not want homework. So it's that idea. The downside of this is that minority viewpoints are not recognized and not accepted. But Rousseau is going to believe that this is a way to create a more moral society, a way to create a more moral government, and more just laws. And so he believed that this is not only going to help create, help society and advance society, but also will help advance government as well. So that's Rousseau, and we'll talk a little bit more about Rousseau and his ideas concerning women a little bit later. All right, in his text MLA. Another important thinker, ladies and gentlemen, is Cesare Beccaria. He was Italian, and he was an aristocrat, and he was commenting on law, ladies and gentlemen. His famous text is called On Crimes and Punishment. And he started to really apply critical thinking and critical analysis to punishments and law. And what he wanted was to, make punishments within the law, effective and just, and, humanize the criminal law, but also make law more rational and reasoned. During this time, ladies and gentlemen, you might, for example, stealing something or getting in trouble, you might have your arm cut off, or you might have your eyes taken out, or if you spoke to a sheriff or something like that, your tongue ripped out or something like that. And he wanted to make punishments effective, practical, reasoned, and not just punishments for the sake of punishment. And so he's really trying to rationalize criminal law and the legal system. He wanted punishment for a crime to be rational, on the damage done to society, and also he wanted to separate law with religion. He argued that the purpose of law was not to necessarily impose the will of God, but he's going to be arguing that the purpose of law and punishment is to help advance society, help teach people what is right, what is wrong. And he's really trying to advance the law code from something that's a little bit more religiously based and based more on medieval traditions and notions. He opposed the death penalty, except for the most serious threats against the state. He opposed torture, especially to extract confessions. And I want to talk about these, ladies and gentlemen. And part of the death penalty still today is very controversial. Some states really don't use it that much. Some other states in the United States use it. And we'll have a little conversation about the death penalty in class to get some different perspectives on it. but he was opposed, Beccaria, and this is relatively new, opposed to the death penalty. For most cases, some cases like I said, the most serious threats against the state, he did not argue against that. But one of the big things, he opposed torture, especially to extract confessions. Back in the day, ladies and gentlemen, uh, you know, and when you might have a local law enforcement interrogating someone, is one of the ways that they would try to you know get answers for a crime, or information they want to know, is they would torture people. They might have them all bound up or tied up to something, and cut off a finger for every wrong answer they didn't like, or peel someone's skin off, or hurt them. And Beccaria argued this was not a very effective way to get a confession, because you would get a lot of false confessions. You would see people tied up or something like that, being tortured, confessing to crimes that they did not commit, just to not be tortured and experience a lot of pain. And so Beccaria said that this is just really silly, because it's not like the law enforcement's really getting anywhere. They're not, for example, if they're torturing someone to get a confession for theft, or a crime, and they torture the wrong person who says I did it, but it's not the right person. He's Beccaria's like, what's the point? You're not getting the right person. So he believed that there would be that torture was not really efficient in extracting truthful confessions, because people were kind of pushed to their physical and mental breaking point, and are gonna confess to crimes that they did not commit. Okay, and his views, Beccaria, are going to be really influential to a lot of the enlightened thinkers that we are going to enlightened rulers that we're going to be looking at. Frederick the Great, which we'll get into, is going to ban torture. Catherine will restrict torture, and Joseph of Austria is going to ban torture and the death penalty. He's not going to necessarily ban other harsh punishments, but Beccaria is going to be very influential. And to this day, we still have a lot of influences. I mean, like I said before, the death penalty is still very highly controversial, and you do have people and politicians and leaders opposing it, and some people supporting it. So definitely very influential. And torture as well. I mean, different torture still goes on today, and you have some politicians, speaking out against different kinds of torture, and whether it's acceptable or not. And so very much some of these ideas are still very much talked about today, which is very interesting. Let's talk about Diderot, ladies and gentlemen. Diderot is really important, ladies and gentlemen, for his Encyclopédie, which we're going to get into. Okay, so Diderot, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a really really cool and important thinker, in that he's going to kind of put all of these ideas in a book, which is one of the first encyclopedias. Now, he did not write the encyclopedia. He's going to edit the encyclopedia, and a lot of the works are not going to be his own. What he's going to be doing is taking a lot of the works from various Enlightenment thinkers and put it into a single book, and that's kind of what an encyclopedia is. It's where you can look up all these different ideas. He's going to have pages of natural science, manufacturing, shipbuilding, agriculture, textiles, politics. It's this compendium of ideas, which is a radical, new notion, and revolutionary. He's going to complete this in the 1770s, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be numerous volumes of texts and illustrations. And what the encyclopedia is, this is really a representation of the thinking that is going on during the Enlightenment. This is taking all of these ideas together and putting it into one text, and really illustrating the Enlightenment's determination to probe the world, to probe reason, to probe a lot of different entities other than religion. The focus on a secular world, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a product that has numerous authors. I mean, Diderot is not writing this. Remember, he's taking the works of other authors and putting this kind of all together, and really is representative of the Enlightenment. So before the French Revolution in 1789, you're gonna have thousands of copies all throughout Europe, and this is going to help popularize the views of the philosophers, spread their ideas. And the encyclopedia is designed to secularize learning and to put all of these ideas together to undermine some of the medieval and prior intellectual assumptions, and to help facilitate the teaching of critical analysis and objectivity and empiricism and reason. And this is emphasizing science, emphasizing politics, emphasizing truth, reason, and criticizing intolerance, injustice, tyranny, and criticizing some notions of religion. It's going to be banned in France. It's going to be placed on the index of prohibited books, but it's still going to spread very rapidly. And this is an important text, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a purely secular idea based in text. Excuse me, based on reason, and it's going to become quite popular throughout Europe and very influential to some of the revolutions and upheavals that we're going to be seeing, ladies and gentlemen. All right, and here are some interesting illustrations from the encyclopedia. And here you can see agriculture, the agricultural revolution. We haven't quite gotten to that yet. We're going to talk about that, but it's very relevant in the encyclopedia. Science, anatomy, new designs for textiles. The Industrial Revolution will be starting during this time in Great Britain. Canal building. Okay. A furnace with coal, brand new. Modern furniture making, which is pretty cool. Anatomy. I mean, this, ladies and gentlemen, is revolutionary. People are able to buy this book and be able to see the agriculture, the canal building, the Industrial Revolution, the anatomy. All this is in one book. That's incredible, ladies and gentlemen. And there's different volumes of this, and so people are able to be able to take this single text, and there's just an explosion of information that's available to them, which is very important. Okay, and as you can see, there's going to be massive subscriptions to Diderot's encyclopedia, and even though it's banned in certain countries, and even though it's banned in certain areas, people are still going to get their hands on this book. It's definitely going to be very very popular. Let's talk a little bit about Condorcet, ladies and gentlemen. He wrote The Progress of the Human Mind in 1794. And what he argued for, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be really important too, that we're going to start seeing within the Enlightenment, is he's going to argue for women's rights. He's going to argue for free and equal education, constitutionalism for women, their constitutional rights for women, and equal rights for women. And we are about to see this within the Enlightenment, ladies and gentlemen, is women saying, hey, that's great y'all are arguing for natural rights and freedom of speech. What about us? Any of this apply to us? And that's going to be super important, ladies and gentlemen, within the Enlightenment. That's going to be a major flaw within the Encyclopedia and Diderot, is that actually Diderot did not include a lot of works written by women, and included a lot of ideas that were very oppressive to women. Condorcet is going to be very influential in facilitating this conversation of what about women, equal rights for women. And this is going to be important. We're going to talk about this within the American Revolution and in the French Revolution, is where do women fit in all this? Because there's going to be all this, supposed progress, but who's it for? Is it only for males, and specifically the white males, or are women allowed to participate and gain rights as well? So Condorcet is bringing up a very good point: women's rights, which we will continue to talk about throughout this chapter. Immanuel Kant, really important, ladies and gentlemen. His text is that I really that I believe is really important, is what is enlightenment. He talked about the idea of dare to be enlightened, and we're gonna get into that. He's German. And he was really influential in pushing the Enlightenment, in that he believed that people need to seek out their enlightenment. Dare to know, dare to be enlightened, push yourself. Be reasoned, look at the world through another lens. He separated science and morality into separate branches of knowledge, but he really push this notion of challenging yourself, dare to know, dare to be reasoned, be curious, question. Really influential in his ideas, ladies and gentlemen. This is Immanuel Kant. He was German. All right, let's stop here for today. That's the rest of the Philosphes, ladies and gentlemen. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about religion. Thank you so much.